Hello, welcome back to the World Rebalance. This video continues our series, The Dragon's Return. Episode 5, The Great Acceleration, year 2000 to 2035. History does not always move gradually. In the early 21st century, China's rise shifted from steady growth to something far more powerful, acceleration. A transformation so rapid and far-reaching that it began to reshape the foundations of the global economy. This episode explores the period in which China moved beyond a developing nation and became a central force in the world system. From its entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001, to the construction of a vast infrastructure network, to the emergence of the most comprehensive manufacturing ecosystem in history, China did not simply grow. It compounded. Urbanization on an unprecedented scale, long-term planning, technological advancement, and the rise of a vast domestic market combined to produce one of the most significant transformations in modern history. This is not merely a story of economic development. It is a story of a civilization regaining momentum, and in so doing, reshaping the world around it.
Episode 5, The Great Acceleration, year 2000 to 2035. History does not always move gradually. Sometimes it advances like a river, slow, steady, predictable, and sometimes it moves like a flood. China's modern rise has been a flood, fast, relentless, so fast, in fact, that it has forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. What once seemed permanent was only temporary. The global order was not a law of nature. It was a chapter, and chapters end. China's rise is often described as an economic miracle, but miracles are simply events that overwhelm our imagination. What happened in China was not magic. It was discipline. It was planning. It was ambition applied at a scale the modern world had never seen. The reforms of the late 20th century were an awakening, but after the year 2000, something changed. China did not simply grow. China compounded, and when a civilization of over 1 billion people begins to compound, the result is not growth, it is transformation. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. To the West, this was an opportunity and a gamble. There was a belief widely held that economic integration would reshape China, that prosperity would lead to political convergence, that China eventually become more like the West. But China had a different strategy. It did not open itself to be changed. It opened itself to use the world. Factories expanded, ports multiplied, supply chains reorganized. Manufacturing shifted eastward, not temporarily, but structurally. China became something unprecedented, not just a participant in global trade, but its center of gravity. The first sign of China's deeper ambition was not ideology. It was concrete, steel, rail, ports, bridges, airports, entire cities. Infrastructure rarely captures headlines. But infrastructure is destiny. It determines how fast goods move, how efficiently industries operate, how productive a society becomes. And in the early 21st century, China launched the largest infrastructure build-out in human history. Highways across mountains, bridges across vast rivers, airports like futuristic cathedrals, ports that redefine global shipping, and most symbolically, high-speed rail, not a line, a network, a web of steel connecting cities, regions, economies, compressing time itself. China did not build infrastructure because it was rich. China became rich because it built infrastructure. Alongside this came a transformation on a scale never seen before. Urbanization, not millions, hundreds of millions. people moved from villages into cities, cities became megacities. Megacities became networks. This was not just migration, it was a restructuring of civilization. Urbanization creates productivity, it concentrates talent, it accelerates innovation. China did not resist this process. It engineered it, and in doing so, it made the future visible in concrete, in steel, in skyline. A key driver of this acceleration was time, or more precisely, how time is used. In many Western systems, politics operates in cycles, elections, policy reversals, short-term priorities. In China, the system allows something different: continuity, plans that span decades, investments sustained across generations. China began to act not as a reactive state, but as an architect, building not just for today, but for power tomorrow. What seemed excessive at first, empty cities, underused infrastructure, often became essential within a decade. China builds the future in advance. China's rise was powered by manufacturing, but not simply by cheap labor. The deeper story is organization, a complete ecosystem, factories, suppliers, engineers, logistics networks, ports, railways, finance, all integrated in many sectors. China did not become a producer, it became the producer. The world became dependent on Chinese capacity, and with that dependency came something subtle: power, not through force, but through indispensability. There was a time when made in China meant something simple, cheap, disposable, low quality. That time has passed. China has moved up the value chain. Electronics, high-speed trains, telecommunications, drones, electric vehicles, satellites. China no longer only assembles, it designs, it engineers, it innovates. This shift did not happen by accident. It is the result of scale, education, and relentless iteration. A system producing millions of engineers will eventually produce innovation. This is not ideology, it is mathematics. At the same time, something else changed. China stopped being only a nation of workers, it became a nation of consumers. A vast middle class emerged, buying, traveling, investing, demanding. The domestic market expanded into one of the largest on earth. And this changed everything. Because a country with internal demand is harder to contain, China is no longer just part of the global economy. It is increasingly capable of sustaining itself. Digital technology became the nervous system. China did not simply adopt global platforms. It built its own e-commerce, payments, messaging, integrated into daily life. In many cities, cash disappeared. The smartphone became a wallet, an identity, a marketplace, a gateway to society. This integration created speed, and speed is power. Behind all of this lies one of the most significant transformations in modern history: poverty reduction. Hundreds of millions lifted out of extreme poverty, rural villages connected, opportunities expanded, living standards transformed. For many Chinese citizens, this is not abstract, it is personal. And it shapes legitimacy not through ideology, but through results. By the 2010s, something became clear. China was no longer just rising, it was becoming structural, a pillar of the global system, a central trade partner, a driver of demand, a shaper of markets. When China slows, the world feels it. When China grows, the world moves. This is what real centrality looks like, from growth to power, and then another shift. From growth to power, technological self-sufficiency, global infrastructure investment, military modernization, not necessarily for conquest, but for protection. Protection of trade, of flows, of national interests. A nation at the center of global trade must be able to defend its position. The threshold of 2035. Looking ahead, 1 year appears again and again. 2035, a threshold. By then, China aims not only to be developed, but to lead in artificial intelligence, energy, manufacturing, biotechnology, space. These are not industries. They are the architecture of the future. And if China dominates them, it will not just be wealthy. It will shape the century, the West's miscalculation. In hindsight, the West made a critical assumption that China would remain subordinate, that integration would produce dependence, that prosperity would produce convergence. But China had a different trajectory. It integrated, learned, scaled, and then began to reshape the system itself. China never promised to become Western. It promised to become strong. The meaning of acceleration, the Great Acceleration, is not just an economic story. It is a civilizational story, a story of scale, of discipline, of transformation within a single lifetime. From bicycles to high-speed rail, from villages to megacities, from poverty to global centrality. It is the rediscovery of momentum, and that momentum is still building. In closing, the years between 2000 and 2035 may one day be seen not as China's rise, but as its return becoming irreversible. In the next episode, we turn to the force that will define the decades ahead. Technology, not as tools, but as systems. Systems that will reshape power, society, and the future itself.